is that?
That's what you
It's like stuffing dead animals and mounting them. So this is not taxidermy. This is taxonomy. Taxonomy is the study of how we classify living things. By classify, we mean how we put organisms into different groups and categories based on their similarities, based on how closely related they are. That's what taxonomy is. There's going to be some terms that can be confusing. We're not going to get to these today, but probably tomorrow. But you have a list of some of this vocab to help you out. So, to start off, like I said, taxonomy is the science of classifying and grouping living things.
Is he Latin?
Well, we'll talk about that. So, why is this an important activity to classify things? Well, for several reasons. It helps us to understand how living organisms are related, to see the similarities and differences between different groups. All of this can be explored through classifying species into these groups. And so today we'll talk a little bit about the history of classification. So, you know, as long as humans have been around, they've grouped things and categorized and classified things. But our modern system, the system really that we still use today, was developed, it was sort of started by a man called Carolus Linnaeus. Now, Carl Linnaeus, his actual name I think was Carl von Linn, but he was very enthused about, what did somebody just ask, what language? Latin. And he actually changed his name to sound more Latin, calling himself Carolus Linnaeus. And we'll talk more about Latin in a minute. But Carl Linnaeus helped give us our modern system of taxonomy. So therefore, he's often called the father of taxonomy. And so Linnaeus was trying to make sense of all of the various living organisms on Earth. And so he started to group them in certain ways and come up with a way of naming them that would make sense and that would be useful to scientists throughout the world. Okay? You know, we call the tree out in the courtyard, we would probably call a white pine tree is what one of those pine trees is. In Spain, they would call it something else. In Japan, the same exact tree would have a different name. Okay? In Germany, it would have a different name because we all use our own languages. So we could be talking, two people could be talking about the same exact species of tree, but use different words and not be able to talk about that.
What's the correct?
So there is no correct one. Those are called common names. When I say white pine tree, that's just a common name in English of that type of tree. But there is one, what we call scientific name for that tree. It's Pinus strobus is the scientific name of a white pine tree. And whether you are from Japan or Russia or Italy or wherever, if you're a scientist studying trees, you know that that's Pinus strobus. And if you're talking to another scientist and you use that word, you know you're talking about the same thing. And that's where these scientific names can be useful. Jackson?
Is that why like every single species has like a wolf, like the gray wolf is Canis lupus?
Yes, every species that's been identified has a unique scientific name that's just for that species.
In Latin.
In Latin.
What's a pig?
I don't know all of them. Porcine.
Porcus lupus.
No. Porcinus, I believe. I'm not sure. But anyway, let's move on and I'll answer your question in a second. So the system that Linnaeus came up with, and the system we're talking about now, is called binomial nomenclature. It's a long two words, but it means something pretty simple. We'll talk about that in a second. Now, I have some Latin students, correct? Who's in Latin? No one's in Latin in this whole class?
I just know a little bit.
All right. Well, if you were in Latin, at the top of every homework assignment would be a line in the word nomen. It means name.
No
You have to
kidding.
write your name there. Nomen in Latin means name. So nomenclature is a system of naming things. Binomial. Again, nomial means name. What about the prefix bi?
Bye.
Like bicycle
Oh,
Two.
like it's like
Two.
Yeah.
versus tricycle, that's three.
Oh,
Unicycle, one wheel.
Well,
Bi means two. So this is a two-name naming system. That's what the words mean. And that makes sense in what we were just talking about. Pinus strobus. That white pine tree has a two-part name. Canis lupus. Felis domesticus. Ursus arctos.
It sounds
These are all scientific names, and they are all in Latin. Maggie,
I know the Latin name for gorilla.
what is it?
Gorilla.
I don't believe that's.
I read it in a book.
I don't think that's not that. I'll Google it after, but I'm pretty sure that's incorrect. All right, Joseph.
Is
What's his face? German?
Carlinnaeus, maybe, or maybe Austria in Europe. I'm not exactly sure. I'm not sure. Yes. Okay.
Okay, so are like all these words in Latin because he created them and he like was like in touch with Latin.
Yeah, but there's also another reason. It's not just that he liked Latin, and we'll talk about that in a second. But first, like for example, humans. Does anyone know the scientific name for humans? Yeah, Christian has it. Homo sapiens is the scientific name for humans. It means knowing man.
That's cool.
And so, yeah, you guys have noticed, all of these are in Latin, and there's a reason for that. It's like I just mentioned, you know, in Spanish or Japanese or Russian or Italian or English or German, we have all different words for the same exact thing. We all call a dog something different. But Linnaeus came up with the idea of if we use Latin, today, where on earth, what country do people speak Latin as their normal language? Right, nowhere. So that means Latin is a language that doesn't really change. Latin is the language of ancient Rome, and it's a language that many people still study because Latin is the root of Romance languages, Spanish, French, Italian. And so Latin is can be used universally of people of all different cultures and countries to agree on one specific set of names for things. In Latin, we say is a dead language, and therefore it doesn't change. In other languages that are used day to day, they're constantly changing, and words change in their meaning, and new words are added, words stop being used. But Latin is sort of a set language that's always going to be the way it is. And so people can agree on it. Okay, and scientists can study it and understand these names and be sure that they're all talking about the same thing by using Latin as their language. And so all scientific names, as you hear them, they are in Latin, or they're made to sound Latin.
Isn't that why when you become a doctor or something in like politics, a lot of people say you should study Latin in school?
Yeah, people say for a lot of reasons. You know, for example, anatomy. Most anatomy is named after Latin, using Latin words, and so Latin is very useful in helping to understand other languages as well. So it's pretty commonly studied. All right, so why do this? Well, what we call common names can be misleading. When I say that's a white pine, it's not white at all. So that sort of doesn't really make sense. If I think about a jellyfish, is it a fish?
It's not
It doesn't have a brain.
No, and it doesn't taste good spread on toast. So it's a misleading name.
It's very sad.
A seahorse, is it a horse?
No,
Obviously, no, it is a fish. Ringworm is an infection you may get on your skin. It is not caused by a worm. It's caused by a fungus.
What? Isn't it a worm?
No,
isn't it?
it could be. It's in the form of, it's usually a circular patch on your skin. That's why it's called
Starfish
ring.
is not. It's not.
Starfish is not a fish, nor is it a burning globe of hydrogen helium.
Like the star.
Yes. All right, guys, Jackson. What?
I was riding a four-wheeler, I had that ringworm from the mud.
Yeah, it could be like the funguses in the mud and stuff, and if it gets on you, then it could infect your skin. So, these common names are sometimes misleading and can be confused when people are talking. And so when we write scientific names, we'll talk about this, we always write them, first of all, like you said, they're in Latin, and we write them a certain way. If you're typing them, they're italicized. If you're, they're also, the first word is always capitalized, the second word is not capitalized. So, you guys, have you watched Roadrunner cartoons before?
Yes.
If you watch the very beginning of the Roadrunner cartoons, they always have like a little introduction section, and like they're running around, and then they freeze frame them. And what do they put underneath them?
Thus, names.
Like WP.
Well, no, they put a name, a scientific name. They're made up though. They're like jokes. The actual, these are both actual animals. A roadrunner is Geococcix californis, is its real scientific name. A roadrunner is Canis latrans, is its actual scientific name. But when you watch the cartoons, they make jokes of it. For example, the roadrunner they call Accelerati incredibus. And again, they make these words sound Latin. They italicize them. They capitalize it first, so it looks like a real scientific name, but it's a joke. We're Disapirius quickius. Birdius tastius. Okay, so those are just little jokes that they show at the beginning of the episodes. Roadrunner digestus, Appetitus giganticus, or Edius birdius. So again, they're just little jokes, and if you understand what scientific names are, then that's what they're doing there. Let's just watch this video, a little bit about
Until the great
classification.
ages of exploration in the 15th, 16th, and 17th centuries, people had no idea of the immense variety of plants and animals that shared this planet with us. Aristotle, the first scientist to attempt a scientific classification, found room for about 600 species of animals. As late as 1600, only 6,000 species of plants were known.
By contrast, today, over 2 million species of living things have been described. For biology, one of the most important of the early investigators was a poor Swedish boy named Carl Linnaeus.
Linnaeus hated school, but he loved plants. As a young university student, he left on a field trip to Lapland to collect plant and animal specimens. The 4,600-mile trip cost him only $100. But the knowledge gained on the trip paid off handsomely for himself and for mankind. A few years later, Linnaeus published his first book, Systema Naturae. It was so popular he became a great celebrity. In this book, he proposed a classification system for plants and animals that is still in use today. All living things, he suggested, should be grouped into species, genus, order, class, and kingdom. Later, he invented the binomial nomenclature system as well. Each kind of living creature would be assigned a double name in internationally accepted Latin. Genus first, species second. For the first time, system and order were being brought into the study of the living world. And as more and more plants and animals and microscopic creatures were discovered, the question was, why? Why are there so many different kinds of living things? How are they all related to one another? And with the discovery of more and more fossils in the 18th and 19th centuries, new questions were added. Why did so many creatures that used to live on Earth no longer live here? And what relation is there between these animals and plants that left behind their bones and imprints with present-day animals and plants?
All right, so grouping these organisms, these different groups, allows us to understand and see how they're related a little bit. So I asked you guys at the beginning class about kingdom. That's one of these groups. They're called taxa, but there are others as well. Kingdom is a pretty big group. There's only 6 kingdoms, really. So every species you could find on Earth goes in one of those 6 kingdoms. So obviously the animal kingdom has lots of different things in them. Lots of things that are very, a worm all the way up to a person are all animals. So they're not necessarily very closely related. These are big groups. So we're going to learn about the groups and then talk about a way to help you remember them. So the very top layer, the biggest category, is something called domain. And domain is actually bigger than kingdom. Okay, we talk about 3 domains. Everything on Earth is in one of these 3 domains. In fact, a plant, a mushroom, a person, a worm, an insect are all in one single domain. So it's a very big, very broad category. If we go one step down, a little bit more specific, then we have the kingdoms. But again, these are very big groups. Within the kingdoms are smaller groups called a phylum or a phylum. The next level down is class.
Big classy.
Like us, or like what's in there?
Then it's order. I will go over that in a second. Next group is order, then family,
Is that us?
then genus. And what's the most specific one?
Genus. Family.
There's one more, species.
Wow.
So those are the groups that we're going to use. And you're going to have to memorize these. In a couple minutes, I'll help you to find a way to remember. So as we go down from domain to kingdom to phylum and so forth, the number of organisms in each one gets smaller and smaller. In each of the 3 domains, there's millions of species.
So we're speaking.
In each species, there's just one thing. So we get less and less organisms. Now I need you to make a change in your notes, because this is wrong.
Oh, I'm certain wrong.
As we get down here, how closely the members are related increases.
Number, wait, what? What are we changing?
Change decrease to increase here. So as we go down this chart, the relatedness of the organisms increases. And we'll see that in the next slide too. So if we look here, this doesn't include domain. This starts at kingdom. That's okay. So I have several things: a grizzly bear, a black bear, a panda, fox, a squirrel, a snake, and a starfish. So all of those things, some are obviously more similar than others, but they all share some characteristics in common, and therefore they're all in one kingdom, the animal kingdom. All of those are animals. So that's a broad group. Obviously, a starfish and a black bear are not very similar, but they do have a couple similarities that keeps them in the animal kingdom. We go down the next step, a little bit more specific, to the phylum. The phylum Chordata are animals with a backbone. So that includes all the bears, the fox, the squirrel, and the snake, but not the starfish. So we got a little bit more specific. We have fewer species in there, and they're more closely related. Let's take it another step further. Class Mammalia. These are what?
Mammals.
These are mammals. Again. So now we're getting more specific. All these things have fur, they all nurse their young, and so forth. So that includes all the bears, the fox, and the squirrel.
The snake does not.
Not the snake, that's gone now. All right, go another step further into order Carnivora. These are the mediating mammals. Okay? Squirrel is not one of them. Okay? Now we have the fox and the bears. Go down a step into family Ursidae.
Bears.
This is the bear family.
Oh, yeah.
So it includes all the bears. Okay, and the fox is no longer there. We go in one step down into genus. Now we're getting very specific.
The genus.
Genus is a small group. There's a couple things in that genus. Ursus, these are the brown bear, the black bear, the grizzly bear. Okay, they're very similar to each other. Then as we go the final step into species, we're left with just one thing. Okay, the grizzly bear, Ursus arctos. That's its scientific name. It's one species. There's only one thing that's in that species. So as we go from those big groups to the smaller groups, we get more and more related, and we get more and more specific.
That makes sense.
Okay, does that make sense? Alright, this is our last slide.
Never mind, I don't know what's the last.
Alright, so like I said, you need to memorize domain down to species in the correct order. So a couple ways to help you with this. First, 2 sentences that might be helpful. The first one is like a classic one, it's old. Dear King Philip came over for great soup. If you can remember that sentence, the first letter of each word stands for one of those groups. Domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species. So that's sort of the classic one. The next one is not quite as nice, not quite as appropriate, but maybe more memorable.
Oh God.
Dumb kids play catch on freeway. Goes flat.
Did you make that up?
No. Let's say Miss Arcuri made it.
That's so mean. No, you said we must say that. You did it.
To make yourself feel
Really? I don't think that's true. So either way, in a few minutes, I'll also give you another way to remember that probably is the way you will work the best for you. If you ask after class, probably almost any 8th or 9th grader to name kingdom down to species, I almost guarantee all of them will be able to do it. And they can do it because of this section over here. But we'll get there in a minute. Joe?
We're gonna think of dumb kids playing catch on freeway.
Alright, so let's go over these. Going from, again, the most general to the most specific. See if you guys can help fill them in. Don't look back in the previous page.
I have no idea.
Alright, so the most general. Jared?
Domain.
Domain. That's the D.
Kingdom.
Hold on. So domain's the biggest group. Alright, somebody else raise your hand. Tell me the next one. Karima? Kingdom. How about after that one? Joe?
Phylum.
Phylum. Yep, PH. Phylum. Domain, kingdom, phylum. How about the C? Maggie?
Class.
Class. Comes after that.
This one.
Anyone? Raise your hand, please. Right? Order. Okay. Austin?
Family.
Family. Next one. Sarah? Genus.
But where's the G? Dear King Philip came over for soup.
Great.
Oh.
And Olivia? Species. And when we are writing the scientific name for something, like I said, Pinus strobus for the pine, white pine, we get that by combining the genus of it and the species. So a white pine tree, its genus is Pinus, and its species is strobus. We'll look at some other examples of scientific names. Let's look at where humans are in this then. So that's what we're going to fill in on this right side. So the domain of humans is something called eukarya. And eukarya is a huge, huge group. Just about anything you think of that's alive is probably in the domain eukarya. Okay, a plant, moss, algae,
Seaweed. Fish.
what's that? Seaweed, fish, insects. Almost anything you probably think of that's alive is in this eukarya domain. The other two are we'll talk about later on. All right, kingdom for humans.
Animal.
Yep, animal kingdom. Well, not yet. Within the animals, there's 2 big splits. Worms would be in one, sponges, clams, humans, squirrels, lizards would be in the other. Jared?
Mammals.
No? You're getting, nope. What? No, not worm, cold-blooded. What's different between a worm and a snake, for example.
Backbone.
Backbone. They are called chordates because they have a spinal cord. We are chordates. All animals with a backbone, vertebrate is another word, yep. But the phylum is called chordata. They're chordates. Alright, within the chordates, within the animals with backbones, there's a few big groups. What are humans in?
Mammals.
Mammal. Within mammals?
Insects.
Insects.
No. You're saying words here. Austin? No. You might not know. You've heard the word, I'm sure?
Omnivores.
No. They're called
Full-blooded.
primates. Humans are primates.
Oh, monkeys.
Monkeys are also primates. Apes are also primates, yes. From here on out, humans are the only species left in the family Hominidae
Wait, why is that?
because there are no other species in that family.
Did there used to be?
Yes.
So what if we all died and then that can be
Genus Homo, species Sapiens.
Oh.
And again, this is where humans' scientific name comes from, the genus and species, Homo sapiens. You need to know Homo sapiens is a scientific name for humans, but you don't need to know all the other. What?
Yeah, look up a gorilla.
I'll check it later. All right, last is another way for you to remember the order, but it does not. Here's a disclaimer. This version doesn't include domain. Domain was one. Domain is sort of like if you learned about the classification in elementary school, you probably didn't mention domain. It's like a newer classification, and some of the groups you never see or you don't hear much about. But so a lot of people just start with kingdom, but you do need to know that there's domain as well. But this this song only starts with kingdom.
It's a song.
Well, song is
Okay.
you'll see.
In Mr. D class, we learned kingdom came against spaghetti.
What?
But we gonna do it a different way, like kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. Kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. Kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. Kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species.
Kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. Kingdom, phylum, class, order,
Kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species.
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 Kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. Kingdom, phylum, class, order,